The alien ambassador's question hung in the air like a death sentence. What happened to the Zerathi? Commander Sarah Chen felt the blood drain from her face. Around the gleaming conference table aboard Station Harmony, 12 different alien species had gone completely silent. The Zephyrians' crystalline bodies stopped their usual soft humming. The slug-like Morandi ceased their constant bubbling chatter. Even the machine entities of the Nexus Collective powered. Down their data streams, everyone was staring at the humans. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with her diplomatic partner, Dr. Marcus Webb. His weathered face had gone pale beneath his graying beard. In 30 years of interspecies relations, she'd never seen him look so afraid. The young Altarian ambassador who'd asked the question tilted her elongated head, confused by the sudden tension. Her large silver eyes blinked slowly as she continued. I've been studying historical records for my thesis on extinct civilizations. The Zerothi appear in databases up until approximately 200 of your Earth years ago. Then, nothing. Complete silence. No records. No archaeological sites, no trace they ever existed. She paused, looking around the room with growing unease. But the gap in the records suggests they were once quite powerful. Their territory spanned 17 star systems. They had advanced technology, a thriving culture. What could have possibly— That's enough, Dr. Webb interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut hyperspace itself. The Altarian's antenna-like appendages twitched in surprise. I don't understand. Did I say something wrong? Sarah forced herself to breathe normally. The other species were watching with the kind of morbid fascination reserved for impending disasters. The Krell delegation's reptilian faces showed something. That might have been fear. The ethereal Luminians actually stepped back from the table, their energy forms flickering. Ambassador Lirelay, Sarah said carefully, choosing each word like she was diffusing a bomb. Some historical topics are sensitive. Sensitive. Lirelay's voice rose an octave. But surely academic inquiry into the fate of an extinct species is perfectly reasonable. I mean, what's the worst that could have happened? Natural disaster? Plague? Internal war? The silence stretched until it became physically uncomfortable. It was Captain Torres of the Earth Defense Force who finally spoke. His scarred hands were clenched into fists on the table. Kid, you really don't want to know, but I do, Lirelay insisted, her youthful enthusiasm overriding the obvious warning signs. As a xenarchaeologist, I have a duty to understand no. This time it was Sarah who cut her off. You really don't. The Krell ambassador, a 7-foot-tall reptilian named Scarth, leaned forward. His forked tongue flicked out nervously. Perhaps it would be wise to change the subject. Why? Lirelay demanded. What aren't you telling me? What happened to the Zerathi that's so terrible you won't even discuss it? Dr. Webb stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on metal. Meeting. Adjourned. You can't just— Lirelay began. Meeting adjourned. Webb's tone could have frozen plasma, as the various delegates began filing out. Sarah noticed how they gave the human delegation a wide berth. The Zephyrians' crystalline forms chimed with what sounded like nervousness. The Morandi left trails of anxious slime. Even the usually fearless Krell kept their distance. Lirelay remained seated, her silver eyes wide with confusion and growing alarm. What did I do? Just asked a simple question about galactic history? Sarah looked down at the young alien, feeling a mixture of pity and dread. Lirelay, there are some things in this universe that are better left buried. But trust me. On this, Sarah said quietly. You don't want to dig up humanity's ghosts. As Sarah walked toward the exit, she heard Lirelay calling after her. What ghosts? What are you talking about? What did humans do to the Zerathi? Sarah didn't turn around. She couldn't, because if she did, she might actually tell her. And once that story was told, there would be no taking it back. Behind her, she heard Lirelay's voice growing more desperate. Please, I need to know. What happened to them? What did you do? The door sealed shut with a soft hiss, cutting off the young alien's pleas. But Sarah knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Lirelei was young, curious, and stubborn. Digging. Eventually she would find the truth. The truth about what happens when you make humanity truly angry. The truth about the Ayawathi. The truth that the rest of the galaxy spent 2 centuries trying to forget. Chapter 2. The Dig 3. Weeks later, Dr. Marcus Webb's worst fears came true. "Sir, we have a problem," his assistant, Lieutenant Hayes, burst into his office aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia. The young man's face was flushed, and he was clutching a datapad like it contained a live explosive. Webb looked up from his morning reports, already knowing what he was about to hear. "Let me guess. Ambassador Lirelei. She's not just asking questions anymore, sir. She's actively investigating. She's getting close." Webb set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, fighting the urge to hurl it against the wall. How close? Consulted his datapad, his hands shaking slightly. "She's obtained archaeological permits for the former Zerathi systems. 3 different universities are backing her research. The Altarian Science Council has classified it as a priority xenohistorical investigation. Damn it." Webb rubbed his temples, feeling a familiar headache building. What else? She's been contacting retired Earth Defense Force personnel, veterans from the Outer Rim campaigns. Some of them are talking. The headache exploded into a full migraine. Which veterans? Admiral Sarah Voss. Webb went very still. Voss is talking to her. Not directly, sir. But Lirelei somehow got access to Voss's personal logs from the Kepler station incident. The classified ones. Webb's blood turned to ice water. Sarah Voss had been the commanding officer during humanity's first official contact with the Zerathi. If Lirelei had those logs, "Get me a secure line to Earth Command," Webb ordered. "Priority 1, encryption." "Yes, sir." "But, sir, there's more." Of course there was. "What?" "She's not working alone anymore. 3 other young xenarchaeologists have joined her team. 2 Altarians and a Zephyrian crystal singer named Resonance of Truth." Webb actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. A truth singer. Perfect. Zephyrian crystal singers were living lie detectors. If Resonance of Truth was part of Lirelei's team, they wouldn't be able to hide behind diplomatic half-truths and careful omissions anymore. The crystal singers could literally hear deception in a person's voice, could sense the emotional resonances of hidden truths. "Sir, what should we do?" Webb stared out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there in the dark between worlds were 17 dead star systems. 17 systems that had once buzzed with Zerathi. Life and civilization and art and dreams. 17 systems that humanity had turned into graveyards.
Here.
"Give me that secure line," Webb repeated. "And Hayes, start drafting contingency protocols." "What kind of contingencies, sir?" Webb turned back to his assistant, and Hayes took an involuntary step backward at the expression on the older man's face. "The kind we hope we'll never have to use." Meanwhile, aboard the research vessel, Dawn's Light in the Zarian system. Ambassador. Lirelei stood on the observation deck, staring down at the planet below. What had once been Zarian Prime, the capital world of the Zerathi Empire, was now a ball of crystallized glass. "The entire surface has been fused," reported Dr. Kethka, one of her Altarian colleagues. His long fingers danced over the sensor. "Controls. Temperature readings suggest this happened approximately 200 years ago. The energy required to accomplish this, ... double quotes." He paused, recalculating. "It would have taken the combined output of at least 50 Starkillers." 50 Starkillers, Lirelei whispered. Starkiller weapons were theoretical at best. Most civilizations considered them too dangerous to even research, let alone build. Who has that kind of firepower? The third member of her team, Resonance of Truth, sang a low, crystalline note of deep unease. The Zephyrian's crystalline form pulsed with worried colors. "The harmonics are wrong," the crystal singer intoned. "This destruction, it carries echoes of rage, ancient rage." Lirelei turned to her team. "What do the historical records say about Zarian Prime's final days?" Dr. Vethka, the second Altarian on her team, consulted his databanks. "Nothing specific. But there are references to something called the Kepler Station incident in several fragmentary reports. Kepler Station, Lireley mused. I've seen that name before. In the logs I acquired from retired Admiral Voss, she activated her personal data pad and pulled up the encrypted files. It had taken considerable diplomatic pressure to get access to these records, and even then most of them were heavily redacted. But there were fragments, pieces of a larger, more terrible picture. Listen to this, she said, reading from Admiral Voss's personal log. Day 47 of the Kepler Station siege. The Scifi continue their ... experiments. On the human civilians, the sounds coming from the research levels are, God help us all. The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Experiments? Dr. Kethka's antenna twitched nervously. What kind of experiments? Lireley scrolled through more fragments. Day 52. We've lost contact with Dr. Martinez's family. The Zerothi researcher who calls himself Flesh Shaper Vorthok has requested more human subjects for what he terms biological compatibility studies. I've refused, of course, but our position is deteriorating rapidly. Resonance of Truth sang a sharp, discordant note. Pain, the crystal singer translated. These words carry the resonance of unimaginable pain. There's more, Lireley continued, her voice growing quieter. Day 58. They brought back what was left of the Chen family. I've ordered the footage sealed permanently. No one should have to see what the Scifi did to those children. No one. Dr. Vethka's face had gone pale. Children? They experimented on children? It gets worse, Lireley said, though her hands were now shaking as she scrolled through the logs. Day 63. The rescue mission has been aborted. Command says we're on our own. The Scifi have begun broadcasting their research results to the other human colonies. They want us to see what they've learned about human anatomy, about our pain thresholds, about how long we can survive without ... single quotes. The log entry cut off abruptly. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, Resonance of Truth sang a single pure note of realization. Oh, the crystal singer whispered. Oh no, I understand. Now, understand what? Lireley asked. The Zephyrian's crystalline form flickered through colors Lireley had never seen before it. Deep reds and violent purples that spoke of rage and horror and something far worse. You awakened something that should have stayed sleeping, Resonance of Truth sang. You made humans angry, not frustrated, not annoyed. Truly, deeply, completely angry. Dr. Kethka's antenna drooped. Surely that's an exaggeration. Anger alone. Could it not? Resonance of Truth's song turned sharp and discordant. Look around you. An entire civilization, 17 star systems completely erased from existence. Look at this planet below us. They didn't just kill the Scifi. They turned their worlds into monuments to vengeance. Lireley stared down at the crystallized surface of what had once been Zarian Prime. In the fused glass, she could make out the shadows of what had once been cities, frozen forever in the moment of their destruction. How? She whispered. How did they do this? That, said a new voice from behind them, is exactly what you're not supposed to find out. They turned to see Commander Sarah Chen standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 Earth Defense Force Marines. Her expression was grim, resigned, and deeply tired. Commander Chen, Lireley began. I know exactly what you were doing, Chen interrupted. The question is, are you prepared for the answer? Hash Chapter 3. The truth about Kepler Station. Commander Chen dismissed her Marines with a subtle gesture, then moved to stand beside the observation viewport. For a long moment, she simply stared down at the glassed surface of Zarian Prime. You want to know what happened to the Scifi? She said finally. Fair enough, but understand this. Once I tell you, you can never unknow it, and neither can anyone you share it with. Lireley's team exchanged nervous glances, but the young Altarian's curiosity burned stronger than her fear.
We need to know.
For the historical record, for understanding, Chen repeated with a bitter laugh. Yes, that's what we thought too at first. She turned to face them. My grandmother was Sarah Chen, the station commander's daughter. She was 8 years old when the Scifi took Kepler Station. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Lireley felt her legs go weak. Your grandmother was one of the subjects, Chen confirmed. She survived. Barely. But the rest of her family. ... She gestured toward the dead world below. This is what happens when you torture a human child in front of their entire species. Dr. Kethka's voice was barely a whisper. The logs mentioned experiments. The Scifi were biochemists, Chen said, her voice clinical and cold. They were fascinated by human pain responses, by our emotional bonds, by our capacity for suffering. They believed that by understanding human psychology, through direct experimentation, they could develop the perfect methods of control. She activated a holographic display, showing the schematic of a space station. Kepler Station was a research outpost on the edge of human space. Families of scientists, about 3,000 civilians total. Scifi took it intact, specifically, because they wanted live subjects. Resonance of Truth sang a low, mournful note, the harmonics of this memory. They're saturated with anguish. The experiments lasted 93 days, Chen continued. The Scifi documented everything. They broadcast it to nearby human colonies, believing it would demonstrate their superiority and make us submit to their rule. Liralay's mouth had gone dry? What did they do? Chen was quiet for so long that Liralay began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. They wanted to understand human familial bonds, so they would separate families then. Torture one member while forcing the others to watch. They documented how long it took for a parent to break when watching their child suffer. How a child's psychology changed when they watched their parents die slowly. Dr. Vethka made a choking sound. They were particularly interested in human children, Chen went on relentlessly. Young minds, they theorized, would be more adaptable. They could be ... modified. To serve as perfect slaves for Scifi masters? Modified how? Liralay asked, though she immediately regretted the question. Surgical alteration of brain chemistry? Behavioral conditioning through extended torture? Psychological breaking and rebuilding. Chen's hands clenched into fists. My grandmother was selected for the empathy suppression experiments. They wanted to see if they could turn human children into perfect, emotionless servants. The observation deck had gone completely silent, except for the ship's ambient systems. What they didn't understand, Chen said, was that humans have something they'd never encountered before, something that transcended their scientific models. What? Liralay whispered. Collective rage. Chen activated another hologram, this one showing star charts and fleet movements. When word of Kepler Station reached Earth, something unprecedented happened. Every human colony, every military unit, every civilian transport, everyone stopped what they were doing and turned towards Scifi space. The hologram showed thousands of ships converging from across human territory. It wasn't ordered by any government, Chen explained. It was spontaneous, species-wide response to the torture of our children. Human beings from across 50 star systems dropped everything and came to end the Scifi. Dr. Kethka's antennae were trembling. Surely the Scifi tried to negotiate. To surrender? Chen's smile was terrible to see. Oh, they tried. When they saw the size of the human fleet approaching, they released a statement saying the experiments were concluded and the remaining survivors would be returned. Remaining survivors? Liralay asked faintly. Of the 3,000 civilians on Kepler Station, 214 were still alive after 93 days of Scifi science. The number hit like a physical blow. Liralay actually staggered. The human fleet's response was broadcast across all frequencies, Chen continued. A single word transmitted simultaneously by every ship, every captain, every crew member. What word? No. The hologram shifted, showing the positions of human ships around Scifi space. They had formed a complete blockade around all 17 star systems. The Scifi tried to explain that they were simply advancing scientific knowledge. They offered to share their research with humanity. They pointed out that the survivors could still be saved if we approached diplomatically. What did the humans do? Dr. Vethka asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. We gave them a choice, Chen said. Every Scifi colony, Every Zarathi colony, station, every ship. They could execute their scientists who had participated in the Kepler experiments, turn over all research data for destruction, and submit to permanent monitoring by human forces. Or, Lirale asked, or we would make sure that the word Zarathi became nothing more than a cautionary tale told to children across the galaxy. Resonance of Truth sang a note of pure crystalline horror. They chose war. No, Chen corrected. They chose pride. They said that humanity was being irrationally emotional and that their research was too valuable to destroy. They said we would come to our senses once we realized the scientific benefits of their work. The hologram showed new symbols appearing. Throughout Zarathi, space tactical markers, indicating the positions of human fleets. What happened next wasn't war, Chen said quietly. War implies that both sides have a chance of winning. She gestured toward the crystallized planet below them. This is what happens when you make humanity angry enough to set aside every moral constraint we've ever imposed on ourselves. How? Lirale whispered. How did you destroy 17's star systems? Chen was quiet for a long moment. Den. Are you familiar with the concept of stellar engineering? In theory, Dr. Kethka replied weakly. Humans had been developing the technology for decades, but we'd never used it. It's too dangerous, too powerful, too... final. Chen's voice carried the weight of centuries. But when we saw what the Zarathi had done to our children, we decided that some things were worth crossing moral lines for. The hologram changed again, showing technical schematics that made Lirale's mind reel. Massive devices, each one larger than a space station, designed to manipulate the fundamental forces that held stars together. Exstellar manipulators, Chen explained. And 17 of them, one for each Zarathi system. We turned their suns into weapons. You made their stars go supernova? Dr. Vethka asked in horror. No, Chen said. That would have been quick. We wanted the Zarathi to understand what they had done. We wanted them to feel the same helplessness that the children on Kepler Station had felt. Oh, shit. She gestured toward the planet below. We turned their stars into focused energy beams. Solar flares that could be directed and controlled. We spent months slowly sterilizing each world, layer by layer, city by city. Lirale felt sick. You cooked them alive. We gave them the same chance they gave our children, Chen replied coldly. The chance to watch everything they loved die slowly, while being powerless to stop it. Resonance of Truth's crystal. Form had gone completely dark. The crystal singer was emitting a continuous low-frequency wail of despair. The other galactic civilizations Lirale managed, they tried to stop you. A few tried to intervene diplomatically. We told them they were welcome to share the Zarathi's fate if they interfered. Chen's expression was stone after we demonstrated our stellar manipulation technology on the first 3 Zarathi systems. No one else objected. How long did it take? Dr. Kethka asked, his voice barely audible.
2 years,
Chen replied. 2 years to completely erase a civilization that had existed for millennia. By the end, the surviving Zarathi were begging us to just kill them quickly. Did you? No, we wanted them to live long enough to understand what they had done. We wanted them to experience the same despair, the same helplessness, the same agony they had inflicted on innocent children. Lirale was openly weeping now. How could you? How could anyone do something so... monstrous, Chen finished. Because they made us monsters. When you torture children, when you broadcast their screams across space as a demonstration of your power, you don't get to complain about what comes next. She moved closer to the viewport, her reflection ghost-like in the reinforced glass. This is why we don't talk about the Zarathi, she said quietly. Not because we're ashamed of what we did, but because we're terrified of what we're capable of when someone pushes us far enough. The observation deck fell into a silence so complete that the ship's ventilation system sounded like thunder. Finally, Lirale found her voice. What happened? To the survivors? The ones from Kepler Station? Some recovered, others didn't. My grandmother spent the rest of her life in psychiatric care. She never spoke again after we rescued her. Chen turned back to face them. but she lived long enough to see every single Zarathi world turn to glass. And you think that justifies? I don't think anything justifies what we did, Chen interrupted. But I know what happens when you make humanity choose between justice and our children. Every time, we will choose our children, even if it means becoming monsters ourselves. She moved toward the exit, then paused. You wanted to know what happened to the Zarathi, now you do? The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? The galaxy has a right to know, Lirale said, though her voice lacked conviction. Chen nodded slowly. Maybe, but ask yourself this. What happens when the next species decides to test humanity's limits? What happens when they hear this story and think, surely humans wouldn't do that again? She gestured toward the dead world below. Them. This is what we're capable of when we're angry. Do you really want to remind the galaxy of that? The door sealed shut behind her, leaving Lirale and her team alone with their terrible new knowledge. Below them, the crystallized remains of Zarian Prime continued their silent orbit around a star that had been turned into an instrument of vengeance. And, in the depths of space around them, 17 dead star systems served as monuments to a simple truth. There are some lines you don't cross, and if you do cross them, you better make sure there are no humans left alive to respond. Chapter 4. The Choice 3 days later. Aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything. In recorded history, Lirale sat in the witness chair, her silver eyes hollow with the weight of what she now knew. Around the curved table, representatives from dozens of species watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to naked fear. Ambassador Lirale began High Counselor Vax, his Krell voice a careful rumble. You have requested this emergency session to present findings from your archaeological investigation. The floor is yours. Lirale stood slowly, her legs still unsteady. In her hands she held a data core containing everything the logs from Kepler Station. The technical specifications of humanity's stellar manipulators, the complete record of how an entire civilization had been methodically erased from existence. Honored counselors, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I have discovered the fate of the Zarathi Empire. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several species had representatives stand up in surprise. The crystalline Zephyrians began emitting harmonic frequencies of acute anxiety. That's impossible, declared Counselor Thises of the Hegemony Worlds. The Zarathi records were completely purged from all databases. Nothing survived there. Disappearance. Not nothing, Lirale said, holding up the data core. I have Admiral Voss's personal logs. From Kepler Station. I have technical specifications for weapons that should not exist. I have the complete record of humanity's response to Zarathi actions. Dr. Marcus Webb, representing Earth in the human delegation, had gone completely pale.
Ambassador Lirale.
I must advise you to consider the implications of no Lirale. Interrupted, with more force than anyone had ever heard from the normally soft-spoken young alien. For 2 centuries, the galaxy has lived in ignorance of what happened. We deserve to know the truth. She activated her data display and holographic images filled the center of the chamber. The delegates could see the technical schematics for stellar manipulators, the before and after images of Zarathi worlds, the fragment logs documenting the torture of human civilians. The Zarathi Empire was not destroyed by natural disaster, plague, or internal conflict, Lirale announced. They were systematically exterminated by humanity as an act of vengeance for the torture and murder of human children. The silence that followed was deafening. High Counselor Vax was the first to find his voice. Are you saying that humans committed genocide against an entire species? I'm saying that humans turned 17 star systems into graveyards because the Zarathi tortured children for scientific research. The Morandi delegation began emitting distressed bubbling sounds. The ethereal luminins flickered in patterns that suggested intense debate among their collective consciousness. This is why Dr. Webb said quietly, we don't talk about the Zarathi. Counselor. Thises leaned forward, his reptilian features sharp with concern. Dr. Webb, can you confirm these allegations? Webb stood slowly, every year of his age showing in his posture. The events described by Ambassador Lirale are ... accurate. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began shouting questions, demands, accusations. The noise level rose until High Counselor Vax was forced to activate the chamber's sonic dampeners just to restore order. Silence. Vax roared, his Krell voice carrying enough authority to cut through the pandemonium. Dr. Webb, you will explain. Now Webb activated his own data display, showing a simple stellar map with 17 dark zones marked in red. 112 years ago, the Zerathi Empire attacked a human research station called Kepler Station. They took 3,000 civilian hostages, including many children. His voice was steady, clinical. For 93 days, they conducted biological and psychological experiments on these hostages. The experiments were designed to understand human pain responses and emotional bonds. Experiments. The question came from Counselor Zeth Prime of the Silicon Collective. What kind of experiments? The kind that reduced a population of 3,000 to 214 survivors, Webb replied flatly. The chamber fell silent again. Zerathi believed they were conducting valuable scientific research, Webb continued. They documented everything and broadcast the results to nearby human colonies, believing it would demonstrate their intellectual superiority and technological advantage. What was humanity's response? Asked the Altarian Prime representative. Webb's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. We killed them all. The simple statement hit the assembly like a physical blow. All of them? Counselor This is asked faintly. Every Zerathi in 17 star systems. Every colony, every station, every ship. We developed stellar manipulation technology specifically to ensure that not one survived. The Zephyrian delegate, a crystal singer named Harmony Vages, emitted a low, mournful note. But ... genocide is the ultimate crime. How could a species as civilized as humanity ... Because they tortured our children, Webb said simply. When you harm human children, civilization becomes irrelevant. But surely there must have been innocent Zerathi, protested the Merendi representative. Children of their own, civilians, who had nothing to do with the experiments. Yes, Webb agreed. There were millions of innocent Zerathi. We killed them too. The blunt admission sent shockwaves through the assembly. How can you stand there and admit to genocide so calmly? Demanded Counselor These. Webb turned to face him directly. Because, given the same circumstances, we would do it again. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Are you threatening us? Thesis asked, his voice barely controlled. I'm explaining the consequences of certain actions, Webb replied. The Zerathi thought they could torture human children and face only conventional military response. They were wrong. They pushed humanity past every moral boundary we had ever acknowledged, and we responded accordingly. High Counselor Vax leaned forward. Dr. Webb, you must understand how this appears to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity has essentially admitted to the complete extermination of an entire species in an act of revenge. That's correct? And you feel no remorse? Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. I feel remorse for what the Zerathi forced us to become. I feel remorse for the innocent Zerathi who died for the crimes of their leaders. I feel remorse for the children who died on Kepler Station. He paused. But do I regret ensuring that no other species will ever consider human children acceptable test subjects? No, I do not. The chamber descended into heated arguments as various delegations debated among themselves. Some species called for sanctions against humanity. Others pointed out that the events were over 2 centuries old. A few delegates quietly suggested that perhaps the Zerathi had gotten what they deserved. Finally, High Counselor Vax called for order. The question before us now is what to do with this information. Ambassador Leorile has uncovered evidence of what amounts to the greatest genocide in galactic history. It's also evidence of the greatest crime against children in galactic history, Dr. Webb pointed out. That doesn't justify, doesn't it? The interruption came from Commander Sarah Chen, who had been sitting silently in the gallery. She stood and moved to the speaking floor. May I address the council? High Counselor Vax nodded reluctantly. I am Commander Sarah Chen of Earth Defense Forces, she began. My grandmother was 8 years old when the Zerathi took her. She was one of the 214 survivors of Kepler Station. The chamber fell silent. For 93 days, she was subjected to experiments designed to determine how much psychological trauma a human child could endure before complete mental breakdown. She watched her parents die slowly while Zerathi scientists documented her emotional responses. Chen's voice remained steady, professional. She lived to be 93 years old. She never spoke again after her rescue. She spent every night of her life screaming in her sleep. She died calling for her mother. She turned. To face the assembled delegates, you want to debate the morality of what humanity did to the Zerathi? Fine. But remember this. Every single human child who died on that station, every scream of agony, the Zerathi broadcast as research data. Every violation of innocence they documented in their scientific journals, all of that happened first. That doesn't justify genocide, Counselor These has insisted, doesn't it? Chen asked. When a species decides that torturing children is acceptable behavior, what exactly do they deserve? Proportional response, suggested the Lemenian delegate. Justice, not vengeance. Justice. Chen laughed bitterly. What justice exists for a civilization that turns child torture into scientific research? What proportional response exists for the systematic destruction of innocence? She gestured toward the holographic display showing the crystallized remains of Zerathi worlds. This is proportional. It destroyed 3,000 lives over 93 days. We destroyed their civilization over 2 years. They got to experience the same helplessness, the same despair, the same agony they inflicted on children. But the innocent Zerathi, began the Altarian representative. Where were the innocent Zerathi when human children were screaming in Zerathi laboratories? Chen demanded. Where were the protests, the moral outrage, the demands for justice? The Zerathi celebrated those experiments as scientific breakthroughs. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Every species in this room needs to understand something, Chen continued, her voice carrying across the assembly like a death knell. Humanity has limits. We will negotiate, we will compromise, we will bend over backwards to find peaceful solutions to almost any problem. She paused, letting her words sink in. But if you harm our children, those limits cease to exist. Counselor Vax shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Commander Chen, surely you're not suggesting that humanity would repeat such actions? Chen's smile was terrible to behold. I'm not suggesting anything, Counselor. I'm stating a fact. The technology that destroyed the Zerathi still exists. The will to use it still exists. And the next species that decides to experiment on human children will discover that nothing has changed. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Ambassador. Lirelei, who had started this entire crisis with a simple question about galactic history, finally spoke up. This can't be the answer. Violence can't be the solution to violence. Then what is? Chun asked, turning to face the young Altarian. You've seen the evidence? You know what the Zerathi did? What would you have done? Negotiated. Found. A diplomatic solution. Brought them to justice through proper legal channels. The Zerathi were broadcasting footage of dying children as propaganda, Chen replied coldly. They considered the torture of innocents to be scientific progress. Exactly do you negotiate with that? There has to be another way. There was, Dr. Webb interrupted, standing to join Chen at the speaking floor. For 93 days, human diplomats sent message after message to the Zerathi leadership, begging them to stop. We offered them anything they wanted: technology, resources, territory. We offered to surrender entire star systems if they would just release the children. What did they say? Asked the Morandi representative. They asked for more test subjects. The admission hit the assembly like a physical blow. Of negotiations, Webb continued, the Zerathi sent us a formal proposal. They would stop their experiments on human children if we provided them with children from other species to experiment on instead. Several delegates made sounds of disgust and horror. That was when humanity made its choice, Webb said quietly. We realized we weren't dealing with a civilization that could be reasoned with. We were dealing with monsters who viewed sentient children as laboratory equipment.
Ass!
So you became monsters yourselves? Accused Counselor Leeses? Yes, Webb agreed. Without hesitation, we became exactly what we needed to become to ensure that no child, human or otherwise, would ever suffer that fate again. High Counselor Vax leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelations clearly overwhelming him. The implications of this. If word of humanity's actions spreads throughout the galaxy, then maybe other species will think twice before harming children, Chen said bluntly. Or maybe they'll unite against humanity as a genocidal threat, Vices countered. They're welcome to try, Chen replied. But they should ask themselves, if we were willing to commit genocide to protect our children, what exactly do they think we'd be willing to do to protect our entire species? The chamber erupted into chaos again as delegates began arguing among themselves. Some called for immediate sanctions against humanity. Others suggested that the human response, while extreme, had been understandable given the circumstances. A few quietly admitted that they might have done the same thing. Through it all, Lirelei sat in her chair, staring at the data core in her hands. Everything she had uncovered, every terrible truth about the fate of the Zerothi, was contained in that small device. She thought about her academic duty to preserve and share historical knowledge. She thought about the galaxy's right to know the truth about past events. She thought about the importance of transparency in interspecies relations. Then she thought about what Commander Chen had said, the next species that decides to experiment on human children will discover that nothing has changed. Slowly, carefully, Lirelei stood and walked to the center of the chamber. The arguing delegates gradually fell silent as they noticed her movement. Honored counselors, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have a choice to make. She held up the data core. This contains the complete record of what happened to the Zerothi. Technical specifications for weapons that could destroy civilizations, evidence of humanity's capacity for absolute vengeance when their children are threatened. The chamber was completely silent now. I came here believing that truth and knowledge should always be preserved and shared, that the galaxy had a right to know its own history. She paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. But I've learned something these past few days. Some knowledge comes with a terrible price. Some truths are too dangerous to share. Hands trembled as she held the data core above her head. The Zerothi are gone. Nothing can bring them back. But their story serves as a warning, a reminder that there are lines that should never be crossed, boundaries that should never be violated. She looked directly at the human delegation. I don't agree with what humanity did. I don't think genocide is ever justified, no matter the provocation. But I understand why it happened. And I understand that preventing it from happening again is more important than satisfying historical curiosity. With deliberate ceremony, Lirelei activated the data core's destruction sequence. The device sparked once, then crumbled to ash in. Her hands, the Zerothi are gone, she repeated. And perhaps it's better if the galaxy forgets how and why. She brushed the ashes from her palms and returned to her seat. High Counselor Vax was the first to break the silence. Ambassador Lirelei, what you've just done was necessary, she finished. Some stories are too dangerous to tell. Some knowledge is too terrible to preserve. Dr. Webb stepped forward. Counselor, if I may, humanity has no desire to repeat what happened with the Zerothi. We take no pride in what we did. We simply want to ensure that it never becomes necessary again. And how do we do that? Asked the Altarian Prime representative. By remembering that children are not acceptable targets for any reason, Webb replied. By understanding that some actions will provoke responses that transcend all normal moral boundaries. By knowing, Commander Chen added quietly, that humanity will always choose our children over our consciences. High Counselor Vax nodded slowly. Very well.
Oh.
This session is classified under Emergency Protocol 7. Nothing discussed here will be entered into the official record. Nothing shared here will be transmitted beyond this chamber. He looked around at the assembled delegates. We all now carry the burden of this knowledge. The question is, what do we do with it? We remember, said Resonance of Truth, the Zephyrian crystal singer who had accompanied Liralay's expedition. We remember that there are species in this galaxy capable of terrible things when pushed beyond their limits, and we make sure those limits are never tested again. Agreed, rumbled High Counselor Vax. Let this serve as a reminder to all present. There are consequences to our actions. Some species, when threatened in certain ways, become something far more dangerous than we might expect. And if someone does test those limits again, asked Counselor Theses. The chamber fell silent. Everyone looked toward the human delegation. Doctor. Webb's answer was simple and terrifying. Then the galaxy will learn why we don't talk about the Zerathi. # epilogue. The unspoken truth. * 50 years later. ****. Professor Kethka stood before his Sci-Fi story class at the Altarian University, his antenna twitching with nervousness as he prepared to discuss the most sensitive topic in modern galactic. Studies today will be covering the period known as the Silent Century, he began, his voice carefully neutral. The era between approximately 150 and 250 Earth years ago, when several major galactic civilizations simply disappeared from the historical record. A young student raised her hand. Professor, what happened to these civilizations? Were they conquered? Did they migrate to other galaxies? Professor Kethka paused, remembering a conversation from decades ago. When he had been young and curious and desperate to uncover buried truths, he remembered asking similar questions about a species called the Zerathi. That, he said carefully, is a matter of some debate among historians. But surely there must be records, archaeological evidence. Something to explain. There are some questions, the professor interrupted gently, that are better left unasked. The student looked confused. I don't understand. Isn't the pursuit of knowledge our primary duty as scholars? Professor Kethka looked out the window at the peaceful campus beyond, where students from dozens of species studied together in harmony. Children played in the courtyard, young Altarians, Zephyrian crystal buds, even a few human youngsters whose laughter carried across the afternoon air. Knowledge has a price, he said finally. Sometimes the cost of truth is higher than the value of ignorance. But, Professor, let me ask you this, Kethka said, turning back to his class. If you discovered something that could destroy the peace we've all worked so hard to build, would you share it? If you uncovered a truth so terrible that it might provoke others to violence, would you preserve it for posterity? The student considered this. I'm not sure. Then you're wiser than you know, the professor replied. Class dismissed. As the students filed out, chattering among themselves about the mysterious Silent Century, Professor Kethka remained at his desk. He pulled up a secure file on his computer, one of the few remaining records of his expedition with Ambassador Lirilla decades ago. Most of the data had been destroyed, of course. But he had kept one thing, a single audio recording of a human child's laughter, transmitted from Kepler Station in the days before the Zerathi arrived. He listened to it sometimes as a reminder that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve, a reminder that some truths were better left buried, a reminder that in a galaxy full of species with different values, different cultures, and different definitions of morality, there was one universal constant. You don't hurt the children, because somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the descendants of a species that had once turned 17 suns into weapons were still watching, still waiting, still remembering what they were capable of when someone crossed that line, and if anyone ever forgot the lesson of the Silent Century, well. There was a reason they called it the Silent Century, because when humanity gets angry enough, the silence that follows lasts for generations. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders. But it is also full of warnings, written in languages we dare not speak. Some stories are told in whispers. Others are told in the spaces between words. And a few are told in the terrible silence where entire civilizations once thrived. Asterisk, asterisk. We don't talk about the Zerathi. We don't need to. The empty space where they used to be says everything that needs saying. Asterisk from Unspoken Histories, a study of galactic memory by Dr. Lirile Veska, Professor Emeritus of Xenarchaeology, Altarian University,